Long before history learned how to write itself, before crowns were shaped from gold and laws were carved into stone, there stood a city believed to be chosen by the gods themselves. Its walls were so high they swallowed the horizon. Its streets were washed daily with water, scented by fear. And at its heart sat a king who believed suffering was proof of order. No one remembered when slavery had begun in that city. Slaves were simply always there, carrying stones, digging graves, feeding fires that never went out. They were not given names because names made people human, and humans could not be owned. Instead, they were numbered, branded, and broken slowly enough to keep them alive. Among them was a boy known only as 47. He had been brought to the city in chains at the age of 8. Too young to understand crime, old enough to understand pain. The overseers said he never cried, not when beaten, not when starved, not even when his mother collapsed beside him in the dust and never rose again. But silence, in that city, was more frightening than screams. 47 grew up beneath the palace, in tunnels older than the kingdom itself. While other slaves counted days, he counted patterns. He learned which guards drank too much, which priests lied to themselves, which stones were loose in the walls. More importantly, he listened. The earth spoke down there, not in words, but in warnings. The old slaves whispered legends when the guards were gone, stories of a forgotten oath, of a royal bloodline born in betrayal, of a prophecy buried so deeply that even the king feared its name. They said one day a slave would rise, not to rule, but to end remembering. The king, meanwhile, ruled through spectacle. Every year he held a public execution in the great square, reminding the people what happened when order was questioned. That year, he ordered something different. A slave was to be brought into the palace itself, to serve at the king's table. The choice shocked everyone. 47 was taken from the tunnels, washed, clothed, and led into a world he had only imagined. The palace smelled of incense and rot. The king sat above him, his face unreadable, his eyes sharp with a curiosity that felt dangerous. "You," the king said, "you do not lower your eyes." 47 did not answer. Slaves were not permitted voices. The king smiled. From that moment, 47's life changed. He saw the king in moments no subject ever did, alone, afraid, haunted by dreams he would not speak of. At night, the king screamed names that history had erased. At dawn, he bathed his hands as if blood still clung to them. And slowly, impossibly, the king began to speak to the slave, not as a master, not as a god, but as a man trying to outrun something that followed him even into silence. One night, drunk and trembling, the king whispered a sentence that shattered everything 47 believed. "My throne was built on a child's grave." That was the night the earth beneath the palace shifted. That was the night the prophecy began to wake. And that was the moment 47 realized something terrifying. He had not been brought to serve. He had been brought because the king recognized him. The night after the king spoke of the child's grave, 47 did not sleep. Slaves were used to exhaustion, but this was different. This was awareness, the kind that sharpens fear into focus. The palace felt alive in a way it hadn't before. Walls whispered when no one passed. Torches flickered without wind. And somewhere beneath the marble floors, something ancient shifted, as if disturbed by the sound of truth spoken aloud after centuries of silence. At dawn, 47 was summoned again. Not by guards this time, but by a priest, one of the oldest, his spine bent not by age alone, but by guilt. The man led him through corridors forbidden even to nobles, down a staircase sealed with iron symbols no slave was meant to see. "This place remembers," the priest murmured, almost to himself. "That is why the king fears it." They reached a chamber carved directly into the bedrock. No decoration, no gold, only stone, and at its center, a cracked slab marked with faded symbols older than the kingdom itself. The priest's hands trembled. "You were not chosen by chance." 47 stared at the symbols. He did not understand them, yet they felt familiar, like a language his blood recognized, even if his mind did not. Before the first crown, the priest continued. Before laws and chains, this land was ruled by oath. A covenant between ruler and soil. Break it, and the land takes payment. The priest knelt. Every king since has ruled, knowing the price was unpaid. 47 finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. What price? The priest swallowed. A child of the earth. A bloodline severed. Memories flooded back. Not his own, but echoes. A woman screaming as soldiers dragged her away. A child buried alive beneath a palace still under construction. A vow whispered into dirt soaked with tears. The priest looked up, eyes wet. That child did not die. The word struck like thunder. He was taken by the deep places, the priest said, by the roots beneath the city, by the old memory. And the prophecy said, when the land is ready to collect its debt, the child will return as a slave. 47 felt the ground pulse beneath his feet. No, he said, I am no one. The priest shook his head. That is what makes it perfect. From that day, the king grew weaker. His hand shook when he held a cup. His voice cracked during court. At night, his screams turned into conversations, arguments with someone no one else could see. He began to call 47 by another name, a name no living person remembered. Meanwhile, something else spread through the city. Slaves began dreaming the same dream, of chains snapping without sound, of doors opening on their own, of a figure standing at the palace gates, face hidden in shadow. Overseers noticed tools going missing, locks failing, maps being altered, but there was no leader, no command, no uprising, just anticipation. 47 never ordered anything. He only listened, and when slaves spoke to him, they found themselves remembering who they were before chains. Farmers, sons, daughters, teachers. Memory became dangerous. The king summoned him one final time. This time, no guard stood between them. I know what you are, the king whispered, eyes hollow. And I know what you are here to do. 47 stood silently. I can stop it, the king pleaded. I can free them. In the chains. Just leave the throne standing. For the first time, 47 felt anger. Not loud, not violent, but absolute. You misunderstand, he said. I'm not here to take your throne. The king's voice broke. Then why are you here? The palace shook. Stone cracked. Somewhere deep below, something ancient exhaled. 47 stepped closer and spoke words that were not taught, not learned, but remembered. I am here to remind the land who you buried. The torches went out, and in the darkness, the king screamed, not in fear of death, but in recognition, because standing before him was not a slave. It was the consequence. The next morning, the city awoke to silence. The palace gates stood open. The throne room was empty, and carved into the stone beneath the throne were symbols no one dared erase. By nightfall, the slaves would gather. By dawn, history would break. But the land was not finished remembering, and neither was 47. By the second night, after the palace fell silent, the city no longer felt ruled. It felt watched. No decree was issued, no announcement made. Yet everyone knew something irreversible had occurred. Guards abandoned their posts without orders. Priests locked themselves inside temples and refused to speak. Merchants closed their doors before sunset, not out of fear of thieves, but of memory. The slaves gathered without being called. They came from tunnels, from kitchens, from quarries beyond the walls. Hundreds at first, then thousands. No one raised a voice. No one carried a banner. And yet, for the first time in the city's history, chains lay untouched on the ground. 47 stood among them, not above them. The ground beneath his feet was warm, pulsing faintly like a living thing. When he spoke, he did not shout. He did not command. He reminded. You were not born to kneel, he said. This land remembers your names, even if you forgot them. A woman dropped to her knees, sobbing, whispering her mother's name for the first time in 30 years. A man tore the brand from his arm and laughed as blood ran down his wrist. Others simply stood frozen, as if waiting for punishment that never came. At the edge of the gathering, shadows shifted unnaturally. The old tunnels, sealed for generations, began to open, stone sliding like skin. From within them came not monsters, but bones, remains of those buried alive to feed the palace foundations. They rose gently, arranged by unseen hands, forming circles of remembrance. The city could not ignore this. By dawn, the nobles assembled what remained of the royal guard. They crowned a regent in haste, a man chosen not for wisdom, but for cruelty. He promised order, he promised blood, and he promised to kill the thing wearing the face of a slave. The first attack came at noon. Soldiers marched into the lower city, swords drawn, shouting the old laws as if volume could resurrect authority. They found no resistance. Instead, the streets folded, paths twisted, buildings leaned. The city itself turned unfamiliar. Men vanished between steps. Those who returned spoke of whispers crawling inside their skulls, of streets that led back to childhood memories they had tried to forget, of a figure standing in the dust, watching without hatred. The regent ordered fire. Flames spread through the slave quarters, but the fire did not behave as fire should. It burned only chains, only records, only symbols of ownership. Wood blackened, but did not fall. Flesh was untouched. Panic spread faster than rebellion ever could. In the deepest chamber beneath the palace, 47 descended alone. The roots of the city hung from the ceiling like veins. At the center lay the true grave, not of a child, but of a promise. A stone altar cracked by centuries of denial. The land spoke clearly now, not in whispers, in demand. The covenant had never required a king's death. It required an ending. Above, the regent prepared the final spectacle, a mass execution meant to restore fear. Thousands of slaves were herded into the square. The gallows rose. Drums thundered. 47 emerged from beneath the palace as the first rope was placed around a neck. The ground split the square in two. The gallows collapsed. The ropes turned to dust. And every person, slave, noble, soldier, heard the same voice inside their mind. This debt is not paid in blood alone. The regent screamed and charged forward, blade raised. 47 did not move. The earth rose. Stone wrapped around the regent's legs, then his chest, then his throat. He was lifted, not executed, not honored, but displayed, frozen in terror for all to see. Rule ends today, 47 said, his voice layered with something ancient. But freedom is not a gift. The ground began to shake harder, because the land was offering a choice. And choices always demand sacrifice. 47 turned to the crowd, eyes burning with memory and sorrow. To end this forever, he said quietly, someone must take the place of what was buried. The city went silent. Every eye turned to him, and for the first time, the slaves understood the truth. Freedom would cost the one who gave it. The silence that followed 47's words was heavier than any scream the city had ever heard. No drums beat. No orders were shouted. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The slaves looked at him with something new in their eyes. Not obedience, not fear, but understanding. For the first time, they saw the full shape of the truth. Freedom was never meant to be clean. It was never meant to be cheap. The earth trembled again, deeper this time, as if patience was running out. An old man stepped forward. His back was bent from decades in chains, his hands ruined by stone and fire. You were buried for us, he said softly. Now you ask to be buried again. 47 shook his head. No, I was buried to end this. What comes after must be chosen. The land opened at the center of the square. Not violently, gently, stone folding inward like soil welcoming rain. Beneath it lay the altar, the true foundation of the city, stained not with blood, but with silence. The ancient covenant awakened fully. A voice echoed, not from above, but from everywhere. One life bound the land. One life must unbind it. The crowd waited. 47 stepped forward. Memories flooded him all at once. Not only his own, but the city's. Every slave who had fallen. Every child taken. Every lie crowned as law. He felt the weight of centuries settle into his bones. He turned back one last time. You will forget my face, he said. That is how it must be. But you must never forget what chains feel like. Then he descended into the opening. The earth closed. The shaking stopped. The city stood still. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, something extraordinary happened. The brands on the slaves' skin faded. Not healed, faded, as if they had never been burned at all. The chains crumbled into dust. The palace walls cracked, not collapsing, but shedding their symbols of dominance. Statues of kings split at the neck and fell forward, faces shattering beyond recognition. There was no new ruler crowned. No sobrevivido. The city did not become perfect. Hunger still existed. Disputes still arose. People still struggled. But no one owned another human being again. Generations passed. The city shrank, then vanished. Its stones taken by travelers who never knew what they carried. Its name erased from maps. History reduced it to myth. Yet sometimes, when the earth is disturbed, when foundations are dug too deep or power grows too arrogant, workers report something strange. A warmth beneath their feet, a pressure like a heartbeat, and whispers that say, "Remember, they say freedom does not come from kings. They say chains do not always make noise. They say the land is watching. And somewhere beneath forgotten stone, the consequence still rests, not sleeping, not dead,